Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Veronica, Christoph, great to be moderating a panel. Since we have to speak about from inception to becoming these multi-billion companies, I guess that we can first start with a brief intro of who each of us is. So I can go last. I'll let you, Veronica, start.
Okay, so I started as an investor very long time ago, so late 90s. But Innova Capital, which is my fund, I started that in 2010, investing mostly in growth equity cases. I think our biggest, largest, and most well-known investment in that fund is Movili, which controls iFood, which today delivers almost to 200 million orders per month in Brazil in food delivery, and also has a fintech arm. It's like a holding company right now that dominates food delivery and many other deliveries. But historically, I was an investor in Meli, which you were mentioning. Meli was one of the first cases of Endeavor back then. Now it's worth 87 billion. I just looked it up. But depending on the market, it's been over 100. And also the first case of Endeavor, which was Patagon, which was the E-Trade of Latin America. So I've been doing investments, mostly Latin America, US, and investing in AI now.
Perfect.
And I'm in the global board of Endeavor. That's how we met, because Adrian was running that.
You were my former boss.
Yes.
You still speak, so must be a good experience. Yeah, Christoph, I'm not lucky enough to live in Madrid. I live in Berlin, but I don't need any pity for it. I actually love it. I look after what we invest across continental Europe at Antler. We usually start investing right at inception/pre-seed into technology companies. So the probably better known companies from the portfolio would be Eralo, which is now the biggest eSIM company in the world. If you're traveling, I can give you a discount code. To buy.
Eralo's wonderful. I approved them in the panel at Endeavor. He's wonderful.
So it's a great company.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very interesting case as well how they came to be.
Yeah.
And Lovable, one of the better doing, I think, vibe coding companies. Probably the most exciting Spanish company that we've backed is a company called Voltrack, which sits in Valencia and builds a very, very cool robo-tractor. 3.5 tons heavy, works fully autonomously, fully electric. That is, if you can make it to Valencia at any point in time, this is definitely worth seeing. I got into investing, I think I wrote my first angel investment when I was 24, somewhat out of the fear of, at some point, not being around people that are very smart and very driven anymore. And for me, it was a strategy to try and build a portfolio of cool people that I could be around that are better at doing what they do than I would be if I tried it.
Perfecto. I'm Adrian Garcia. Before anyone looks me up and sees that I'm working in the industrial manufacturing world, I used to work in venture entrepreneurship. For several years, I ran Endeavor, 6 years was it? And then before that, Veronica was reminding me that a friend of hers hired me to actually start Endeavor in Spain back in 2014. And I guess I learned a thing or two along the way. One of my prides was actually this company, which is not water, it's Cabify, no? Cabify was one of the companies that we backed very, very, very early on and now became Spain's first unicorn and a multiplier on its own, no? So we can talk a bit more about multipliers and entrepreneurs and so forth. Since we're talking about entrepreneurship from inception, and I think that since the three of us have seen entrepreneurs from inception. We've seen so many. We've met so many. I feel that the best thing would be storytelling. Maybe we can speak about what we see, the traits and everything, but maybe, I'm thinking about maybe Fabrizio from Movile or iFood, and maybe you can tell us that story and what traits you saw, what made you back him early on, etc.
Okay, so Fabrizio wasn't that early when I met him, but he was in a very different company. Movili at the time had Prosus as an investor, and the company basically sold through carriers various content to their final customers. So they had at the time around 75 million customers, and they were selling all the way from horoscopes to English lessons, games, any type of content, which was in the stores of these selcos, of your carrier. And when I met him, he said, I know what these people like. Instead of doing this through the carriers, why don't I sell directly? Why don't I build from within, because I know their behavior, I know what they consume, etc. And so that's when I met him. So we invested back in 2014, even though we started in 2013. We met him, started collaborating, and so forth. And there were a couple of companies that came out of that strategy. So we bought like 15% of the company. At the time, Mavili was a profitable business. They were doing 360 million in revenues, 40 million EBITDA. We paid a multiple of EBITDA. It wasn't a very attractive company as we saw it, but the entrepreneur was amazing, a really big visionary. He had made like 6 or 7 different acquisitions, and the founders of these acquired companies were still working for him. So how likely is that, right? Normally mergers are very hard to turn out into something that really works. And he had all of these entrepreneurs that he was moving around, motivating to go run different divisions and participate of that bigger dream. And Mavili went on to buy iFood, which at the time was doing 18,000 deliveries per month. And by the time we left, we exited in late 2020, they were doing 45 million deliveries per month, and today they're almost at 200 million. So the company grew like massively, and that original business got sold to, I think, a Swedish player. And today Mavili's main holding in Brazil is iFood, which now became an ecosystem of itself. So they're investing now in travel and other high-frequency types of apps that complement what the food delivery does. So they have all the way from payments. They're financing the restaurants on how they can more efficiently buy their raw materials. They are creating loyalty programs. They're all sorts of different sort of services that are available to the iFood community of customers. And iFood today is probably one of the top 3 brands in the country. They're sponsoring the World Cup official team. It just became a very big business. And Fabrizio, who kind of rebuilt the strategy for the company, was called on to run Prosus, which is a global company worth over 100 billion euros listed in Amsterdam. So it's really a proof that a great entrepreneur and a great CEO has a lot to aim for in terms of dreaming big. After building its own company, he went to run the controlling shareholder, which is incredible.
It speaks so much about what globality is. No, we have a Brazilian entrepreneur, Dutch listed company,
South
African capital, yeah.
Capital, yeah.
Exactly.
With a big Chinese, because they're the big shareholders in many Chinese assets as well. So very diverse.
And from Antler, it's the same thing. It's also been global. I mean, I remember my first engagement with Antler. We were just speaking Scandinavian C-levels, but they were based out of Southeast Asia, and I met some Australians that then were based out of US. But and you are still also all over the world. So tell us a bit more about what you've seen and maybe what story, if you want to focus on. Idolo, Lovable, or
I think for us. Our first office indeed was in Singapore. But a bunch of Europeans that had come to Southeast Asia with the first wave of venture innovation.
And who was one of your first investors as well? It was you had some fancy investors as well in the early days.
Schroders was one of the early backers.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why many of these people went to Southeast Asia was a German company called Rocket Internet. Which famously copied everything that they could find in the world and then built businesses really, really focused on execution and not on the originality of the idea. So they looked at, hey, somebody is selling mattresses online, let's sell mattresses online. Hey, somebody is selling shoes online, let's do that. Hey, somebody's building a discount portal for local bookstores, let's copy that. A lot of that didn't work, but the things that did work were always really, really heavy on execution. And then people just stuck around and figured it's an interesting market and there's interesting talent. And the reason why we have offices all around the world is because strong people originate from all around the world, right? Not every strong founder is in Silicon Valley, fortunately, right? It would be very frustrating for us all if that was the case. By now there's more than 420 cities in the world where a unicorn has been given birth to. And that number has grown almost tenfold in just 10 years, right? So kind of venture and innovation has really, really gone global. But I think for the founders, we usually meet them at the point where they're really just starting, where they are maybe about to incorporate their company, or maybe they have incorporated it already. Maybe it's just thrown away what they were working on before and are now kind of on a new cycle. And I think what's really true for almost all of them, they see something that others don't at that point, and then they end up having great timing. And the one thing we can see when we take an investment decision, the other one we can't really see, because that you'll only see a little bit later, right? So we've spoken about Eralo briefly, right? So Bahadir, the founders of Eralo, used to be selling SIM cards, physical SIM cards, right? So these little plastic thingies with one of the corners chopped off to people on boats, right? People who would come through the Singapore harbor and then go to Australia. And they needed a local SIM card to not be charged to death by roaming charges. And then, because he was in that business of supplying ships with canned tomatoes and SIM cards, he heard of Apple announcing that they'll actually launch this eSIM thing. And he thought, what the hell? If that happens, one of the very, very profitable parts of my business is gone. Right? Then I only have canned tomatoes that I can sell. And he said, what am I going to do about it? Right? And he said, okay, I'll build something on the back of these eSIM things. And he walked around our office in Singapore, and everybody thought, what the hell is that guy talking about? Right? It made no sense to nobody, because nobody had yet started to think about eSIMs and kind of what that would be and what that would mean. In retrospect, it's very logical. Right? It makes no sense that a physical SIM card would be better than an eSIM card, but at that point, it wasn't very logical. And then he ended up having horrible timing and then great timing at the same time, because they raised their Series A right before, I think it was February 2020. Right? And then some of you will remember that the world went to a full lockdown in between February and April of that year. And if you build a business that needs people to go somewhere else, to a foreign country, then that's not optimal. And he had great timing because he had just raised the money. He hadn't actually brought up the burn rate that much yet, so they could just go into somewhat hibernation and then restart thereafter, where travel started to boom. And then all of a sudden, bibbidi-bobbidi-boo, it was great timing once again. So very unlucky and then very lucky, but I think saw something earlier than others that would become quite transformative.
I remember hearing the story from, where would we select it? Did we select in Dubai? Where was it?
In Dubai.
In Dubai, that's what I thought. I remember hearing the story from him. I heard it was late. I mean, you guys
Very
know him
late,
from Inception, so we met him later on.
Yeah, I think he was making over $100 million in revenues already.
Impressive business, yeah. But his story and his storytelling was amazing, yeah.
And I think he's Kurdish, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
he also has this very immigration challenging story. So a big, like a warrior. You know, the guy's amazing.
But it is an easy story to tell.
Yeah.
It's a great story. Kind of, if that happens to you, you have a great story to tell. And he's very lucky in that regard.
When I was running Endeavor, I got to meet the stories at a later stage. No, I was always very frustrated because I missed the action at the Inception part. No, at Inception I got to meet, as I mentioned, Cabify guys, SeatTag, and several others, or even Globo. Globo, I remember meeting Oscar when it was him with a PowerPoint saying, "I'm going to do a delivery company with bicycles." No, but I was always impressed by this really young guy with incredible maturity and very determined on how he was going to do what he was going to do. Maybe we can talk a bit more about that Inception side, no? Those early days, when you meet those founders, what do we see? What do you see in these founders that you decide, yeah, I'm going to back them, no? I mean, because anyone could be $1 billion business and anyone could be a flop. But
I think I can talk about the number one case of Endeavor, which was Patagon. So Wences Casares, for those who don't know, he came from Patagonia, you know, very different background for an entrepreneur. This was, I believe, 1998 that Linda met him. So I got a call from Linda. I had just moved back to Brazil. Peter Kellner, who co-founded Endeavor, was in business school with me at HBS, so he introduced me to Linda. And when she met Wences and thought he was amazing and had this crazy idea of building E-Trade of Latin America, she called me and says, Vero, you know, this guy is incredible, he's doing this in Argentina, but he's going to expand into Brazil, you have to meet him. So I met him, and, you know, really a very, very, very smart guy. At the time I was working for a family office, I showed it to them, they passed. And so I asked my boss, I said, is it okay if I help this entrepreneur because he's very, very good? And he said, no, that's fine. So I started helping him, found him sort of first management team, and he was actually sitting in my office because I still was alone in my office. And basically in a year and a half, I think I helped build Brazil, but we built an operation in like 6 countries and sold to Santander for 750 million 2 weeks before the bubble burst. I still remember when I got the call from him and he said, Verito, la vendimos. I was waiting for my luggage. I had just arrived from Carnival Week in Brazil, from Bahia. And I'm like, what do you mean, la vendimos? He's like, we sold the company. And he had given me options at a 5 million valuation, and imagine selling it at 750. So it was really an amazing win. But Wences was always this very, very special person because he thought very differently. It was probably the person who I had met who thought the biggest that I've ever seen. So thinking big is very important, having a very big ambition, and, you know, projecting that energy and having people sort of support you on that vision is very important. And if you look forward, you know, what Wences did after was even sort of more visionary because he was one of the first guys in Bitcoin. And today, I don't know exactly the numbers, but they said he has 2% or 3% of the outstanding Bitcoins out there. And he did that very early. He wrote a paper, I think it was back in 2013, that he sent by an email. I still have that email saying everybody should hold at least 5% of their wealth in Bitcoins because eventually this will be very significant. And if it's not, you know, 5% won't kill you.
I still pinched myself really because I was there when he was saying that. I was like, really? Bitcoin? What is that? And yep.
And Endeavor ended up benefiting from that. You know, he later joined the board. I joined the global board as well. But he gave some of the shares of Zappo, which was a wallet, to one of Catalyst's first funds, which is an Endeavor-backed fund that invests globally in different Endeavor entrepreneurs.
Perfect, Christoph. At Inception, what are your thoughts? What have you seen? That thinking big. What?
I think super high on energy, super high on positivity. Always seeing an opportunity and trying to go after it. A positive naivety. So if you're not somewhat naive, you're never going to go on that bumpy road of building a business. It's such a stupid idea to build a business. It makes no sense. It's likely going to go wrong.
Very
it's hard. You're likely going to fail. Right? And kind of on the path there, you don't make a lot of money. Right? And kind of in the beginning, you walk around, nobody knows you, nobody wants to talk to you, 100 people say no, and all these investors tell you all sorts of funky reasons why they don't want to back your company. Right? So you have to think about tomorrow's problem, not the problem that you're going to have in a year, right? So you have to be somewhat blind and kind of shut that off. Because if you think about already how hard it's going to be to IPO your company, then you're never going to start it, right? So I think it's people that are really, really very present in the here and now. It's people that get their hands incredibly dirty and just do the stuff. They just build, and they do a lot of stuff that absolutely doesn't scale. They don't think about scaling. And it's people that are good at selling. Right? So I think distribution, everybody kind of on every panel, everybody will always say all the good companies have cracked distribution and all the bad companies haven't. And that's true as you scale, but that's also true at the very beginning. Right? So we see a lot of founders who kind of start blaming each other because one says the product isn't good, so I can't sell it, and the other one says you can't sell it, but the product is good. And then kind of at the end, both may be right, but you need to actually be able to sell. And then a lot of founders think about hiring somebody in sales who would be helping them to sell because they are so experienced in selling, and that almost never works. So you need to be kind of that one-stop shop in the very beginning. And I think there, particularly in Europe, the background of founders, of successful founders, has changed quite a bit over the last decade, roughly. So when you look at all the European unicorns that have been built up until 2020, then you'll find 27% of the founders have a technical background. So they are engineers, they have been CTOs, have been in technical roles. And when you look at the top 10 tech companies in the world, which are almost all from the US, it's, I think, 96%. When you look at the fastest growing software companies, it's 94% of the founders being technical. So something was very different. When you look at the companies that were started in Europe 15, 20 years ago, it was mobile apps and e-commerce, technologically relatively plain, strong in execution, but not technologically. When you look at all the companies that have become unicorns in Europe, that have been started since 2020 and are already unicorns, you'll see more than 90% of the founders being technical in background. And those are not necessarily the people that actually love to sell and love to play the commercial
Or
role.
that are best in that
Exactly.
skill. Yeah.
Right? But there are some that are insanely good at both of these dimensions, right? And these are the real gems. Technical founders who have that capability of being the CEO of the company.
I wanted to add something to that, which is I think you need to have the ability to attract the highest quality of talent. Because, you know, if you're growing a company very fast, really your limitation to executing depends on you having good people to go and, you know, expand into a new market, build a new product, acquire and go run a new division, etc. And in terms of, like, if you look at Latin America and where the founders come from, I don't have the stats on how much is tech background or not, but I have two great examples, like Nubank, which is one of the highest valued companies there, you know, was started by David Vélez, who used to be at Sequoia, and moved to Brazil, had a very tough time in opening a bank account and said, this is broken, I'm going to go on and build a new bank and solve all these issues. And the culture of the company from inception was, we need to hire the best people around the world. So it didn't matter, it wasn't just because he was in Brazil hiring Brazilians, they had people from all over the place. There's a new company right now being built called Frontier by the former, I think it's the former CTO of Nubank who just left to start Frontier. And I have a very close mentee who's now entering there from Yale, Victoria, and she's telling me, hey, Vero, that we speak only English there because the team being hired, there's only 20 people, but it's from all over. So talent you can source globally if you have enough of a good idea and good funding. You should be hiring anywhere if you can't find talent or that expertise locally. But I think being able to attract the talent and sell your idea and lead is probably the #1 skill set that founder needs. You have, for example, Sergio Furio, who was chairman of Endeavor Brazil, who's a Spanish, he was a consultant. He also went into the fintech world and built Creditas, and also hired locals to go and help build the company. So he was also Spanish native, moved there and made it happen. So I think at least in Brazil or Latam, you have founders like the Rappi founders as well, who go and, you know, the biggest market is Brazil, and they just move there and make it happen. So being able to not see the frontiers and hiring globally and leading talent is a very, very critical skill set.
It's funny how in Brazil that happened for a while. It was a Colombian that started Nubank out of Brazil. There was a Spaniard that started Creditas. I was going to say Bank Fácil Creditas out of Brazil.
Meli has its biggest
Meli
market in Brazil.
Even the airline, what is it as well? Loft as well. Or Printy, but then you started having your own generation of amazing entrepreneurs like Cesar with Gympass and, well, now, what's the name? Wellhub now.
Wellhub,
You started having some amazing entrepreneurs, but they were also thinking very globally. I mean, because Cesar's team is also, I mean, yes, there's Brazilians, but there's, I mean, how many nationalities?
And then you have Brazilians going to the US, like Henrique do Bugra and Pedro
Franceschi,
who went to Stanford, dropped out and started Brex. and killing it there, doing an amazing job.
Quite amazing. As we are talking about these entrepreneurs and these founders, we're talking a lot about sole founders, and that's something to actually also analyze. In your experience, having invested in companies, have you invested more in sole founders, in co-founders, multiple co-founders? So looking back, because it's interesting that the examples that we just mentioned are mostly sole founders, no? So
it's interesting. So when we started, we had a rule not to invest into solo founders, which we don't have anymore because it's stupid, right? But on average, it's more likely to go wrong investing into a solo founder. However, you're not looking for the average, right? And as an investor, you're looking for the bloody outlier. You only need to be right about one, and there happen to be a lot of outliers that are actually solo entrepreneurs, right? This is not for everyone, right? Because if you're a solo founder, that means you have to be great at everything. And there's very few people in the world that are really great at everything. And I think also the mental toll is really, really high, because the only people that are your peers are your co-founders, right? Everybody else you've hired, or they're investors, or they're advisors, or something like that.
That's why Endeavor exists, because you have a peer group that is very supportive
Exactly.
to solo founders.
It helps a lot, right? And kind of you need to somewhat then replace that. You need to build your self-help group around you to actually have some sort of replacement for it. Right?
That's a very good point about solo founders and the toughness of doing that. And so one of the first questions I ask when I see a solo founder is, what does your cap table look like? Do you have a very strong program of options for your team? Yeah. Who are the critical people with you? Because sometimes that will cap the growth, really. If a solo founder is maybe too hands-on and not able to share or bring on more experienced sort of management or people that grow with the company to be able to run it.
Yeah. Having said that, there's also some amazing co-founder stories. I mean, in Argentina we have Globant. Here in Spain there's Seedtag. I mean, there's also amazing stories of co-founders that have ended up founding billion-dollar companies.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're almost up on time, but since there might be entrepreneurs in the room, is there any one piece of advice that you would say for the Inception entrepreneurs right now?
Start building, do it now, and make failure not an option, but just kind of go all in, jump. There's a side hustle, don't try it out, just jump all in wholeheartedly, because otherwise you're going to fail 100%. And if you go in, then you might only fail 50%.
I'd say do something that you are extremely passionate and that you believe in, not for the money, but for the cause, for the sake of what you're building. The problem needs to be big enough. A lot of times you see problems that they're relevant, but they're not big enough. So you need to be looking at areas that can scale and try to have an edge. I mean, you need to be doing something better than others, because more than ever right now, it's very easy to build a competitor. So you need to have something that is really different than everybody else, and in a way that is sustainable, or you need to be way ahead. And also, I would really try to look at the tailwind. A lot of times you see great companies, great ideas, but they're just too early. Yeah. Or they're trying to build a Ferrari for a market that buys, Corollas. So you have to build a product, not perfect, but what is a fit for the market that you're trying to reach. So the product market fit piece is very important. And especially, I think, with tech founders, that they're very specific about the tool or the product itself. They tend to be more perfectionists. And sometimes good is better than perfect.
Overthinking, yeah. Well, we nailed it on time. Thanks, Veronica. Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And hope to continue discussing and keep the conversation.
Thank you.